Last June, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of D-Day. That occasion in Normandy was a memorable one for all of us who were able to be there. It was partly a day of sadness, as we paid our respects to those who died for us. But it was also a day full of comradeship and of hope. For me, perhaps the most lasting impression was one of thankfulness that the 40 intervening years have been ones of comparative peace. The families of those who died in battle and the veterans who fought beside them in their youth can take comfort from the fact that the great nations of the world have contrived, sometimes precariously maybe, to live together without major conflict. The grim lessons of 2 world wars have not gone completely unheeded. I feel that in the world today, there's too much concentration on the gloomy side of life, so that we tend to underestimate our blessings. But I think we can at least feel thankful that in spite of everything, our children and grandchildren are growing up in a more or less peaceful world. The happy arrival of our 4th grandchild gave great cause for family celebrations. But for parents and grandparents, a birth is also a time for reflection on what the future holds for the baby and how they can best ensure its safety and happiness. To do that, I believe we must be prepared to learn as much from them as they do from us. We could use some of that sturdy confidence and devastating honesty with which children rescue us from self-doubts and self-delusions. We could borrow that unstinting trust of the child in its parents for our dealings with each other. Above all, we must retain the child's readiness to forgive, with which we are all born and which it is all too easy to lose as we grow older. Without it, divisions between families, communities, and nations remain unbridgeable. We owe it to our children and grandchildren to live up to the standards of behavior and tolerance which we are so eager to teach them. One of the more encouraging developments since the war has been the birth of the Commonwealth. Like a child, it has grown, matured, and strengthened, until today the vision of its future is one of increasing understanding and cooperation between its members. Notwithstanding the strains and stresses of nationalism, different cultures and religions, and its growing membership, the Commonwealth family has still managed to hold together and to make a real contribution to the prevention of violence and discord. And it is not only in the Commonwealth that progress has been made towards a better understanding between nations. The enemies of 1944, against whom so many of our countrymen fought and died on those beaches in Normandy, are now our steadfast friends and allies. But friendship, whether we are talking of continents or next-door neighbors, should not need strife as its forerunner. It is particularly at Christmas, which marks the birth of the Prince of Peace, that we should work to heal old wounds and to abandon prejudice and suspicion. What better way of making a start than by remembering what Christ said? Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven.
How old this is? Granny was christened in this?
Great-granny.
Great-granny. And I was. Look, I was christened in this. Looks remarkably well despite it. I think it must get so incredibly hot inside there, mustn't it?
No.
Some dribbling. You want
Where are we going?
Now you look smart.
William, where are we going?
We're going to church.
We're going to church.
Over there, look.
Over there. And what are we going to do in church? We're going to sing.
Bow.
You going to sing?
No.
No. Give Harry a hug. Hug. Peter and Zara.
I'm going to find Peter's door.
Should we go and find them in a minute?
Zara, would you take my hand? Come and take me. Can you remember what it's called? What the puppy's called? What's the puppy called? It's called Dash. Dash. And you know it's the word you use when you're cross. Dash. It comes out perfectly well as a dog's name, you see.
Does it bite?
No, not yet. But it might after it's finished with you. William, Scott, you met the puppy, didn't you, William?
Who's the other one I have?
Corbin. Yes, we'll get them afterwards. We'll play with them afterwards. Look, Zara.
What's the matter with you today? What's the matter with you today?
I think he's even going to give a little smile, isn't he?
Touch your finger.
Yes.
Pushes me away.
He's very pleased to see you, I think. Don't you?
God bless you, and a very happy Christmas to you all. To parents and children, grandchildren, and of course, great-grandchildren. Looking at the morning newspapers, listening to the radio, and watching television, it's only too easy to conclude that nothing is going right in the world. All this year, we seem to have had nothing but bad news, with a constant stream of reports of plane crashes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and famine. And as if natural disasters were not enough, we hear of riots, wars, acts of terrorism, and generally of man's inhumanity to man. It used to be said that no news is good news, but today you might well think that good news is no news. Yet there is a lot of good news, and some wonderful things are going on, in spite of the frightening headlines. Just think of the quiet courage and dedication of the peacekeepers and the rescue workers, and all those who work so hard to restore shattered lives and disrupted communities. I am in the fortunate position of being able to meet many of these people. For every year, some 2,000 come to investitures at Buckingham Palace to be honoured for acts of bravery or to be recognised for service to their fellow citizens. They come from all walks of life, and they don't blow their own trumpets. So unless, like me, you are able to read the citations describing what they have done, you couldn't begin to guess at some of the remarkable stories that lie behind their visits to the palace.
Dr. Lawrence Pike
Among them, there may be a rarely outstanding doctor who has worked for years in a deprived area. Or a voluntary worker who has given nearly 40 years of his life to campaigning for the disabled. Or a nurse whose care for patients for over 30 years is a splendid example of the work done by members of a dedicated profession. Or another volunteer who has devoted a large part of her life to others in the service of the WRVS. Then there are those who have shown quite remarkable courage and devotion to duty.
The Queen's Gallantry Medal, to be decorated.
Only a few days ago, I was talking to two firemen who had been called to deal with a blazing ship. They knew there were casualties below decks, and despite the fact that both men were injured themselves, they risked the flames and smoke and further explosions and went below several times to bring the casualties to safety. These are not exceptional cases. Every investiture brings stories of bravery and self-sacrifice, like the members of bomb disposal teams, whose cool courage saves so many lives. Naturally, I see more such people in Britain. But as I often hold investitures in other Commonwealth countries, I know that there are people making the same sort of good news all over the world. But while bravery and service to the community are recognized by honors and awards, there are many ways in which people can make good news. Success in industry and commerce, for instance, creates the wealth that provides so many of the things that make life happier and more comfortable. It's not just the big companies with household names. Quite small companies with only a few members can make a very significant contribution to the prosperity of their communities. The people in Britain who have helped their companies to success also come to the palace as winners of the Queen's Awards for export and technology. For example, this one. Here is a firm with only 5 employees who make darts and export them to no less than 40 countries. They were so enterprising that they introduced the game of darts into places where it had never been played. And here are the consulting engineers who won their award for technological achievement for their ingenious work on the Thames flood barrier. A small Scottish firm with 18 employees make a product so good that they have sold their heating systems even in the United States and West Germany. This firm has scored a rare double with their magnets for medical scanners, winning both the awards for export and for technology. There are masses more, and it's encouraging to know that again next year there will be a new group coming to receive their awards, whose achievements will be just as ingenious and just as exciting. There are similar examples throughout the Commonwealth. These success stories are often pushed into the background, but they are the guarantee of our future. Christmas is a time of good news. I believe it is a time to look at the good things of life and to remember that there are a great many people trying to make the world a better place, even though their efforts may go unrecognized. There's a lesson in this for us all, and we should never forget our obligation to make our own individual contributions, however small, towards the sum of human goodness. The story of the Good Samaritan reminds us of our duty to our neighbor. We should try to follow Christ's clear instruction at the end of that story. Go and do thou likewise. I wish you all a very happy Christmas, And I hope that we shall all try to make some good news in the coming year. Every year, this Christmas party is held for the children of the people living in the mews of Buckingham Palace. Everyone seems to be enjoying it. Usually, we're lucky with the weather, but tonight it seems a bit more like a typical English winter. The children have been waiting with the usual build-up of excitement and expectation for Father Christmas to arrive. No doubt wondering what he has brought with him in his sack.
That's it. Nice to see you. Come here. Come around here, look. No, you don't fall out. It's me.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
These are some of the horses that were drawing the carriages at the time of the wedding last in the summer. And these are some of the ones that were having all that cheering and clapping at them, you know. They don't seem to mind at all. Have you been to one of these parties before?
Yes.
Is this the first time? Is it? Oh, yes. I'll get Britain in a minute. Children, the party and the meeting with Father Christmas are perhaps the most exciting part of the evening. But I hope that a walk through the stables also helps to bring the traditional Christmas story alive for them. I hope it also helps them to realize how fortunate they are to have comfortable homes and warm beds to go to, unlike the Holy Family, who had to share with the animals because there was no room at the inn. Christmas is a festival for all Christians, but it is particularly a festival for children. As we all know, it commemorates the birth of a child who was born to ordinary people and who grew up very simply in his own small hometown and was trained to be a carpenter. His life thus began in humble surroundings, in fact, in a stable. But he was to have a profound influence on the course of history and on the lives of generations of his followers. You don't have to be rich or powerful in order to change things for the better. And each of us, in our own way, can make a contribution. The infant Jesus was fortunate in one very important respect. His parents were loving and considerate. They did their utmost to protect him from harm. They left their own home and became refugees to save him from King Herod. And they brought him up according to the traditions of their faith. On this birthday festival, which we try to make an occasion of happiness for our own families, we must not forget those children who are the victims of ill treatment or neglect. It is no easy task to care for and bring up children, whatever your circumstances, whether you are famous or quite unknown. But we could all help by letting the spirit of Christmas fill our homes with love and care, and by heeding our Lord's injunction to treat others as you would like them to treat you. When, as the Bible says, Christ grew in wisdom and understanding, he began his task of explaining and teaching just what it is that God wants from us. The two lessons that he had for us, which he underlined in everything he said and did, are the messages of God's love and how essential it is that we too should love other people. There are many serious and threatening problems in this country and in the world, but they will never be solved until there is peace in our homes and love in our hearts. The message which God sent us by Christ's life and example is a very simple one, even though it seems so difficult to put into practice. To all of you of every faith and race, I send my best wishes for a time of peace and tranquility with your families at this festival of Christmas. A very happy Christmas to you all. Sooner or later, we all become aware of the passing of the years. But every now and then, we get a sharp reminder that time is moving on rather quicker than we expected. This happened to me last month when we celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. I was very touched that so many of you were kind enough to send messages of good wishes. There is no point in regretting the passage of time. Growing older is one of the facts of life, and it has its own compensations. Experience should help us to take a more balanced view of events and to be more understanding about the foibles of human nature. Like everyone else, I learn about what is going on in the world from the media. But I'm fortunate to have another source of information. Every day, hundreds of letters come to my desk, and I make a point of reading as many of them as I possibly can. The vast majority are a pleasure to read. There are also sad ones from people who want help. There are interesting ones from people who want to tell me what they think about current issues, or who have suggestions to make about changing the way things are done. Others are full of frank advice for me and my family, and some of them do not hesitate to be critical. I value all these letters for keeping me in touch with your views and opinions. But there are a few letters which reflect the darker side of human nature. It is only too easy for passionate loyalty to one's own country, race, or religion, or even to one's favorite football club, to be corroded into intolerance, bigotry, and ultimately into violence. We have witnessed some frightening examples of this in recent years. All too often, intolerance creates the resentment and anger which fill the headlines and divide communities and nations and even families. From time to time, we also see some inspiring examples of tolerance. Mr. Gordon Wilson, whose daughter Marie lost her life in the horrifying explosion at Inniskillin on Remembrance Sunday, impressed the whole world by the depth of his forgiveness. His strength and that of his wife and the courage of their daughter came from their Christian conviction. All of us will echo their prayer that out of the personal tragedies of Enniskillen may come a reconciliation between the communities. There are striking illustrations of the way in which the many different religions can come together in peaceful harmony. Each year I try to attend the Commonwealth Day Interfaith Observance at Westminster Abbey. At that service, all are united in their willingness to pray for the common good. This is a symbol of mutual tolerance, and I find it most encouraging. Of course, it is right that people should hold their beliefs and their faiths strongly and sincerely. But perhaps we should also have the humility to accept that while we each have a right to our own convictions, others have a right to theirs too. I'm afraid that the Christmas message of goodwill has usually evaporated by the time Boxing Day is over. This year, I hope we will continue to remember the many innocent victims of violence and intolerance and the suffering of their families. Christians are taught to love their neighbors, not just at Christmas, but all year round. I hope we will all help each other to have a happy Christmas, and when the new year comes, resolve to work for tolerance and understanding between all people. Happy Christmas to you all. In the year just past, Prince Philip and I have joined in the celebration of some notable anniversaries. The events which they marked were hundreds of years apart, but each was important enough to get much attention in 1988. The earliest event which we remembered was the encounter with the Spanish Armada in 1588. The 400th anniversary fell in the same year in which we were able to mark the happy relations between Britain and Spain, which now exist, by our state visit to Madrid. 400 years after the winds blew and the Spanish ships were scattered, the events were remembered without animosity in both countries. These prints from the Royal Library at Windsor illustrate the battles and some of the great fleet which gathered. This year, the present King of Spain showed me the rooms in the Escorial, where his predecessor, Philip II, planned the campaign. Had the fortunes of war gone against us, how very differently events in Britain and Europe would have unfolded. Earlier in the year, we marked another event of the first importance in our history, the 300th anniversary of what is popularly known as the Glorious Revolution. The invitation to King William and Queen Mary to accept the thrones of England and Scotland finally laid to rest the enterprise of England, which Philip of Spain set in hand. It thus gave the particular direction to our history, which was to lead to the development of parliamentary democracy and the tradition of political and religious toleration which Britain enjoys today. It was a great pleasure for us to celebrate that event in the company of the Crown Prince of the Netherlands. Together we visited Torbay, which was where King William landed in 1688. It was shrouded with fog when we were there, but we did manage to see through the mist some of the hundreds of British and Dutch yachts that had assembled there. 300 years may seem a long time ago, but there are still some objects here in Buckingham Palace which bring to life William and Mary as people. And one which I particularly treasure is this little patchbox that belonged to the Queen and which carries her monogram entwined with William's on the lid. The 1988 anniversary season opened in Australia with a grand party on Australia Day to mark the country's 200th birthday. It was a party which went on for most of the year, but Prince Philip and I joined in the festivities in April and May. Like so many visitors in bicentennial year, we brought home some souvenirs of our visit. In our case, it was some delightful early prints of Sydney, which served to remind us of the extraordinary developments which have taken place in Australia in the short space of 200 years. Contrast this scene of Sydney Harbour with the pictures we all saw of the crowded waters around the Opera House and the famous bridge in January this year. Centenaries may seem rather arbitrary occasions, but they nonetheless prompt us to look back into the past. When we do so, we can draw hope from seeing how ancient enmities have vanished and how new nations have grown and established themselves in vigor and wisdom. Equally, they make us reflect on injustices and tragedies and inspire us to do our best to learn from these as well. To do that, we surely should draw inspiration from one other anniversary, the one we celebrate every year at this time, the birth of Christ. There are many grand and splendid pictures in the Royal Collection that illustrate this event, but one which gives me particular pleasure is this precious, almost jewel-like book. It is a book of hours, full of prayers and devotional readings. It's in Latin, but it contains the most exquisite illuminations, and it is these that speak to us most movingly. The anonymous person who drew the pictures nearly 500 years ago has included all the familiar elements of the Christmas story, which we hear with such pleasure every year. Here are the angels bringing the glad tidings to the shepherds who listen attentively. Down here, where baby Jesus lies in the stall, you can see Mary and Joseph watching over him, quite unmoved, it seems, by the man playing the bagpipes overhead. The star over the stable has lit the way for all of us ever since, and there should be no one who feels shut out from that welcoming and guiding light. The legends of Christmas about the ox and the ass suggest that even the animals are not outside that loving care. Recently, many of you will have set up and decorated a Christmas tree in your homes. Often these are put by a window, and the bright and shining tree is there for every passerby to see and share. I like to think that if someone who feels lonely and unloved should see such a tree, that person might feel it was meant for me. May the Christmas story encourage you, for it is a message of hope every year, not for a few, but for all. So in sending you my Christmas greeting, I pray that God may bless you, everyone. I usually make my Christmas broadcast to the Commonwealth from Windsor or Buckingham Palace. This year, I thought I would use the presence of 2,000 children at this occasion, organized by the Save the Children Fund in the Albert Hall, here in the heart of London, to send this special message to the children of the Commonwealth. Those of you present are the immediate audience for my broadcast, but I'm also speaking by radio and television to people throughout the world. All parents would like their children to grow up in peace and tranquility. But for most of this century, the people of this world have had to live through bewildering changes and upheavals. Some of the changes have been for the better. but others might even threaten the world we live in. There are some children who are much less fortunate than others, for they come from countries where nature makes life very hard, with floods and droughts and other disasters destroying crops, making it very difficult to find enough for everyone to eat. Quite a lot of you have written to me during the last year or so, saying how worried you are about the future of our planet. Many of you will have heard of the greenhouse effect, and perhaps you have heard too about even more urgent problems caused by the pollution of our rivers and seas and the cutting down of the great forests. These problems don't affect just the countries where they are happening, and they make neighborly cooperation throughout the world a pressing necessity. With all your lives before you, I am sure you take an optimistic view of the future. But it is already too late to prevent all forms of damage to the natural world. Some species of wild plants and animals are sadly bound to become extinct. The great thing to remember is that it is not too late to reduce the damage if we can change our attitudes and behavior. You've all seen pictures of the Earth taken from space. Unlike all the other planets in the solar system, Earth shimmers green and blue in the sunlight and looks a very pleasant place to live. These pictures should remind us that the future of all life on Earth depends on how we behave towards one another and how we treat the plants and animals that share our world with us. Men and women have shown themselves to be very clever at inventing things, right back to the time when they found out how much easier it was to move things about on wheels, up to the present time when rockets and computers make it possible for people to travel away from our world out into the mystery of space. But these technical skills are not enough by themselves. They can only come to the rescue of the planet if we also learn to live by the golden rule which Jesus Christ taught us: love thy neighbor as thyself. Many of you will have heard the story of the Good Samaritan and of how Christ answered the question from a clever lawyer who was trying to catch him out: who is my neighbor? Jesus told of the traveler who was mugged and left injured on the roadside, where several important people saw him and passed by without stopping to help. His neighbor was the man who did stop, cared for him and made sure he was being well looked after before he resumed his own journey. It's not very difficult to apply that story to our own times and to work out that our neighbors are those of our friends or complete strangers who need a helping hand. Do you think they might also be some of the living species threatened by spoiled rivers? Or some of the children in places like Ethiopia and Sudan who don't have enough to eat? The exciting news of the last few months has been the way in which people in both East and West Europe have begun to think about the future in a less unfriendly way, more as neighbors. It's still hard for us to be sure what is going to happen as a result of these great events. But it would be splendid to think that in the last years of the 20th century, Christ's message about loving our neighbors as ourselves might at last be heeded. If it is, they'll be good years for you to grow up. If we can reduce selfishness and jealousy, dishonesty and injustice, the 90s can become a time of peace and tranquility for children and grown-ups, and a time for working together for the benefit of our planet as a whole. You children have something to give us which is priceless. You can still look at the world with a sense of wonder
and remind us grown-ups that life is wonderful and precious. Often a child's helplessness and vulnerability brings out the best in us. Part of that best in us could be a particular tenderness towards this earth, which we share as human beings, all of us. And together, as the nations of the world, will leave to our children and our children's children. We must be kind to it for their sake. In the hope that we will be kind and loving to one another, not just on Christmas Day, but throughout the year, I wish you all a very happy Christmas. God bless you.